The other day, I saw a news story about how the suicide rate with children, at least the suicide attempts and also the suicidal ideations that are going on in children, is really on the rise. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about that because I feel like there's good answers, better answers, and there's the best answers. And in the news clip I saw, they gave some good answers. And that's typically what I see, is some pretty good answers. But they're not the better answers, and they're definitely not the best answers. So let's go over those today. Hey, I'm Brett, licensed psychotherapist and executive director for The Gathering of Good People. Today, like we said, we're going to talk a little bit about how to help with suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts with small children, because that's really on the rise, and it's quite concerning because none of our children, we don't want any of our children hurt, but it's concerning because I don't think there's a lot of good tools out there to help. And so that's what we're going to go over, specifically some things that you could do to help your child if you have a small child, and make sure that they're suicide proof, if that's a term we can use. So where this idea came from was the other day I was looking at a news story. And the news story was about an increase in children showing up to children's hospitals, ERs, talking about, feeling like, and even attempting suicide. And that's a pretty scary new reality. This particular study showed that kids, 2019, they were like at 3,000 kids showing up to ERs. Just a few years later, fast forward, 2021, and we're looking at 6,000, doubling the number of kids that are showing up in the ER for suicidal thoughts or attempts. So it's not just that your kids are thinking about it or aware of it or talking about it. There's actually more dangerous steps being taken by children. And in fact, in some places, some situations, death by suicide for children is the leading cause of death for children. So super important, super scary, and that's why I think it's really good that we talk about it here. Now, in this particular news story, I think they did a really good job because they interviewed a mom from Minnesota who, it was really a great story because she was a single mom and she just devoted her life to her child, her 10-year-old little girl. And, you know, it was mom and this child. And earlier in the day, the little girl contacts mom. Hey, mom, can we FaceTime? And mom's like, sure, let's do it. And mom gets on, FaceTimes with her daughter. Daughter's like, hey, I lost my tooth. Is that like the cutest thing in the world? Hey, I lost my tooth. And she's talking about, you know, how excited she is and all that kind of stuff. And then when mom gets home later that day from work, daughter's left a note, a suicide note. That's how intentional she was. And then the police and sheriff found her body in a field behind the house later on. What? How crazy is that, right? Holy moly, a parent's worst nightmare. And I think the story's a really great story because it really shows that some of the myths that we think about with childhood and teen suicide just sometimes are true, sometimes are not true. And one of the myths that we think about is that this child's feeling neglected, this child's feeling ignored, this child's, you know, having a really bad day, and they're having all these kind of negative thoughts, and parents just missed it all. But actually what this story is showing is that the mom had a really good relationship with the child, and the child's not feeling neglected in any way. But what this story shows us is how impulsive kids are. Kids are really, really impulsive. And so that's a major issue that we need to deal with. Now, there's good answers, better answers, and best answers in dealing with teen suicide. The good answers, the news story went over, which is the good answer that all news stories go over, is the easiest answer, and that's to make sure that your kids have access to a suicide prevention hotline information. And I have some of that in the description below, so make sure you check that out. I would also put in my kid's phone under their favorites, suicide prevention hotline. And I check it, if the kids are upset, I don't want that in my phone. What if my friends see it? I'd be like, sorry, this is a prerequisite. This is a requirement for you to have a phone, is that this has to be in here. And I would also turn on my kids' tracking devices on their phones and make sure I know where they are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because I just want to make sure that they're safe. And again, kids are going to push back. Kids are going to say, no, no, no. But it's a prerequisite. It's a requirement. It's not an option. And if they take it off their phone or turn it off on their phone, I take away their phone for 24 hours. That's how serious I would take it, because this is a serious issue. So do all the steps. Another program that I would suggest, an app for the phone, is called Me3. And this app's a really cool app because it's basically a suicide plan. If I'm feeling suicidal, this is what I'm going to do. And in it, it has all the steps that a child can do. If I'm starting to feel suicide, here's some techniques I can use to interrupt my thoughts. Here's some breathing exercises I can use to calm myself down. Then I'm going to escalate or kind of move to the next step, and that's where I'm going to call a friend. If that doesn't work, then I'm going to call the suicide prevention. And it has all the steps right there in the program. They're already laid out. Your contact list's already connected. Here's the 3 people I'm going to contact if I'm feeling suicidal. And so it's already there. It's all in one place for a kid. So I think that's a really good answer to have on people's phones. However, there's a better answer. And one of the better answers is, because children are so impulsive, is you've got to take away accessibility. Kids, your kids are this way, right? They have an idea. They get this brainstorm of, hey, I'm going to go scuba diving in the tub. And because their prefrontal cortex, their thinking brain is not online, they don't think the consequences through on that. And they don't know the water and the spills and all the damage it's going to cause. They're just not thinking about that kind of stuff. And that's the way it is also with suicide. They just don't think it through. They don't have the prefrontal cortex to think it through and to really go, this is a permanent answer to a kind of a short-term temporary problem. And so really important for you as kind of a better answer is to take away access to any kind of things that a child could use. 2 of the most common ways children take their own lives is through firearms, through guns, and the other through pills. So a better answer for you than just giving them a suicide hotline number is make sure you take away access. Some people may think that I'm, some liberal kind of guy who, hates guns, but I have tons of guns. I have all kinds of assault rifles. I'm always carrying a firearm with me wherever I go. I think they're important. But here's what's interesting. This firearm is 10 times more likely to kill one of my children than it is to kill an intruder. And that's just the statistics of it, the reality of it. So I got to make sure that I really practice safety with this firearm, because it's potentially going to take my child's life. Now, luckily, my kids are grown and they're not in the house anymore, so I can kind of carry this again. But for a long time, I keep my guns locked up in safes. I like the combination safes, not the keys. Actually, my safe has both, has a key and a combination. I just feel like we should keep all firearms locked up. I know some people want to have instant access to their firearms, but if you have instant access to your firearms, so do your kids. So just reality-wise, I don't mean to be super liberal in kind of my ideas here, but I just think, I would do anything for my kids. And if it meant giving up my rights as an American to carry a firearm, if my child was in a suicidal place, I'd do that. I'd do that in a heartbeat. And I have when my kids were little. Second problem is medications. We got to keep medications locked up because it's just too easy and too accessible for children to use and grab and to take. So I would keep, again, in a lock box, all your medications. Is it inconvenient? Absolutely. Pain? Sure. But I would do it because I would do anything for my children. If I had to lift up a 5,000-pound car, I'd do it. I'd do whatever it took for my children. I'd make whatever sacrifice. I'd be inconvenienced in any way possible to keep my kids safe. So that's the better answer, is to keep accessibility to potential threats away from your children. Now, can your kids find any way to kill themselves if they wanted to? Absolutely. Extension cords, ropes, that kind of stuff, jumping off building, cutting on themselves. Those are all other ways that kids kill themselves, except they're just a little harder. These are really easy to do. Those other ones, cutting yourself to the point where you're going to bleed to death, is hard. Have people done it? Sure. It's just hard. It's just really hard to get yourself to do that. Is it hard to put a rope around your neck? Yeah. Have people done it? Sure. But it's just a little bit harder. So I would take away the easy ways and make accessibility just a little bit harder for them. So that's a better answer. Now, for the best answer. The best answer is to give your kids tools to help them deal with their feelings and emotions. I think that's the absolute best answer because you're providing them internal abilities. I'm not creating an external environment, which I think I need to, but I'm also creating something internally that they can do to help themselves. One of the best tools that you can do to help your children is to regulate their thinker-raters. You don't know what that means? Okay, well, let me tell you. In our brains are always evaluating circumstances. Is this bad? Is this horrible? Is this awful? Is this just inconvenient? We're always rating situations, bad and good situations, to evaluate, to understand how bad, how good. Now, the problem with children is that they don't have good internal ways of evaluating situations. So oftentimes for a kid, something will happen and you and I will think it's not that big a deal, but for your child, because they're not regulating their own thoughts, they can often take things that are small and make them into things that are big. And you've seen that a million times with your children. Their little brother takes their toy or somebody hits them and it's the end of the world, right? That's a normal thing. And that's because your children don't have the ability to regulate their own thoughts. So the Think-A-Rater is a way I help my children regulate their thoughts. And the way the Think-A-Rater works is basically I ask my kids to evaluate any circumstance on a scale from 1 to 10. Using these words, bad, worse, horrible, awful, terrible, they're kind of vague. But if I can help my kids look at things from a number system, it makes it so much easier for them to be able to regulate. So on a regular basis, I'll practice with my kids, even my kids now that are not kids, but adults, I'll practice with them. Hey, where do you think this falls on the Think-A-Rater? And what we'll do is we'll go through different situations and rate them. 1 or 0 being the lowest, actually, to 10 being the highest. And what we'll do is we'll go through a situation and we'll kind of look at it in terms of compared to the worst things possible, the worst circumstances possible. Where does this rate? My kid loses his job. Is that bad? Yeah, absolutely. Does that suck? Totally frustrating. I get that. Where do you think it applies on a Think-A-Rater? It's a 9. No, I don't think it's a 9. House burning down, your brother or sister dying, your parent dying. Okay, I think that would be a 9. I think those are maybe even a 10. Death to me is usually pretty significant, right? Pretty important. But losing a job, not so much. It's not a 10. It's not a 9. It's not even an 8. Nobody's dying in this situation. Is it inconvenient, frustrating, disappointing? Sure, absolutely. It's a 2 or 3. So helping my kids kind of walk through those scenarios on a regular basis each day helps them begin to build an internal sense of regulation within themselves, which is what they need. So when a situation happens, like a friend doesn't text them back, or they get a D or an F on a test, or their best friend dumps them and they're off hanging out with some other best friend, they can regulate that. They can go, okay, that was bad, that was awful, that's horrible, but it's not a 10. It's not something I need to kill myself over, which unfortunately is what's happening with children that are feeling suicidal. They're taking circumstances and they're impulsively seeing them 0 or 10, 0 or 10. And we got to build a regulation in them so they can begin to see that, yeah, probably everything isn't a 10. So those would be my good, better, and best answers for helping your child deal with suicidal thoughts or ideations. If you like this video, like the video. If you want more, subscribe, and come check out our gathering of good people. In our gathering, we put together support groups, and if we can get together a new group of teens or children that are feeling depressed or suicidal, that'd be awesome. Let's do that. That's great. So come on the website, sign up, and let's see if we can get a group together for you. All right. Again, I'm Brett, licensed psychotherapist, and I hope to see you soon at the gathering of goodpeople.com. Take care.